Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This is the fifth one in the Ecology series. It's matter, recycling and decay. So we start to look at how the environment recycles all of the elements, all of the nutrients that it needs to keep putting them back into the organisms to allow life to continue. This is the GCSE level video, and as always, please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you. So if we're talking about matter recycling, it makes sense to first examine that term matter and really think about what is matter. And it's quite simple when you come down to it. Matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. Put that another way, it needs to be made up of subatomic particles. Now, I've just put a little picture up there of an atom for you that you should have studied in your chemistry lessons, and you would have certainly studied this lower down the school. In an atom, you have protons, neutrons and electrons. The protons and neutrons, you can see they're inside the nucleus, they're all clustered together, and the electrons fly round and round that. So those are the subatomic particles. Those make up matter. Now, whilst we've said that at a minimum, matter requires at least one subatomic particle, what we find is that most matter consists of atoms, which means we need to be looking at this. We need to be looking at the periodic table of elements and the atoms of those elements. Because if you think about your chemistry lessons, think about things you may have studied before, really it's only hydrogen, the very first one on the top at the far side over there. Hydrogen has one proton with one electron flying around it. And if it loses that electron when it becomes an ion, then it's only one proton. So that's when there's one subatomic particle, but that hydrogen ion is still matter. Everything else on that table comes up as more than one subatomic particle in its atomic form. Now, just so no one's getting confused, whilst I've given you that diagram of what an atom looks like, you've probably studied it with a diagram a bit more similar to this one. This is the one where you're showing the orbits or shells, you may have referred to them as, of the electrons that travel round that nucleus. So this is a nitrogen ion, as you may have drawn it to show its electron configuration. I'm only putting that there so you don't get confused between the two diagrams that I've got there. But really what we're talking about when we say what is matter, we're talking about atoms, as I put on the title there now. Now, of course, atoms stick together. And as soon as you've got more than one atom stuck together, you've got molecules. So I put you two molecules that should be familiar to you over there. We've got a water molecule with H2O, that's the one with the blue blobs. And we've got carbon dioxide molecule over there as well. So those are relatively small molecules. They're only made of 3 atoms. Of course, you can get many, many atoms that stick together and make much more complex molecules like this one above my head. But basically, atoms coming together, forming ever more complex things. That's all we're talking about when we come talking about matter. But as a very last point on what is matter, because any physicists would kill me if I didn't mention this, matter is a distinct thing from energy. There's only really those two things that exist. There's matter and there's energy. Okay, they're different to each other and they need to be treated so. So having now established what matter is, and that matter is basically atoms, let's think about how those atoms get recycled and reused, okay? Because what we're really talking about is something simple like this. This is a basic analogy, but if you wanted to build a house, you would need to buy some bricks. If you're going to build your house out of bricks, you need those bricks. But what if there were no bricks left? They'd all already been used in other buildings. What you'd need to do if you wanted to build your new brick house was you'd need to recycle old bricks by breaking down an old brick building. Smash it down, take all the bricks, rebuild them in the new style that you wanted to. So this concept of recycling isn't tricky. And the symbol for recycling that I've put up there, you see all over the place now, because it's becoming increasingly common to recycle materials to make new ones. That recycling box, you've hopefully got something similar in your own homes. You can put metal in there, you can put plastic, cardboard, paper. They can reuse it to make new products out of those materials. That means we don't have to create brand new ones from scratch. We don't need to cut down loads and loads of trees to make new paper. We don't have to drill for loads more oil to make plastics. The plastics that are there aren't going to go and pollute the earth if we're recycling them. So from an environmental point of view, recycling is brilliant. But that's the recycling that humans do, that we do to try and minimize waste. But of course, the planet needs to recycle. And that's really what we're talking about in biology. So if you think about the Earth, there's a picture of the Earth there. It's alone, it's distinct, it's totally on its own, floating around in the infinite space. There's nothing really traveling to it. A few comets and asteroids every now and again might hit Earth, but they'd be minimal. Really, what's on Earth is all we've got. So we say that there is a finite amount of matter on planet Earth, and finite means a set amount. It's the opposite of infinite or infinite. Okay, infinite means never ending, finite means absolutely distinct amount. So there's a finite amount of matter on Earth. There's no deliveries of matter that come from outer space, which means that all of the matter currently on Earth has been reused and recycled millions of times already. If you look out your windows and you look at the trees and the birds and the buildings and everything, all of the atoms that make up those things, all of the atoms that make up everything that you can see out of your windows, everything that you can see all around you, including yourself, all of those atoms have already been used to build different things before they were in you. Now that can obviously be spread over millions and millions of years, but we can even look at this in the short term. Now you consider these carrots that I've put over there. Those carrots will be made of millions and millions of atoms. Those atoms got put into the carrot by the carrot plant, which gathered carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it gathered water from out of the soil, it gathered in the minerals, it took all those atoms from those different molecules, smashed them down, like you might smash down the old house, and rearranged them in the way that it wanted them. So those atoms were elsewhere, they came together to build carrots which didn't previously exist. But then you consider as well, links up to food chains. If a human eats those carrots, and I've picked Dan Lydiate here, one of my heroes, Welsh Rugby International. If Dan Lydiate eats those carrots, the atoms inside those carrots become part of Dan Lydiate. So Dan Lydiate there is part carrot, but as is everyone who's ever eaten carrots. The atoms in the carrots become your own atoms. Everything you've ever eaten. If you got up this morning and you had a bowl of cereal, you are now built partly of cereal. You've recycled those atoms. Now, of course, that throws up a much cooler idea that atoms, because they've always been around, they were here when the dinosaurs were around. So those same atoms built T-Rexes and Stegosauruses and Triceratops, those same atoms. There will be millions of atoms in your body that were once the atoms that built dinosaurs. Similarly, almost every person that's ever lived, their atoms have been recycled and gone back into the environment and been rebuilt. So there will be atoms in your body that belong to famous historical figures, kings and queens of the past. Those atoms just keep getting reused and going round and around and around. So let's take a slightly more scientific view of this now. And we're going to kind of simplify it to a more scientific diagram to give an overview of matter recycling. So let's start off with atoms and molecules in the ground and air. So just part of Earth, part of the air. Those atoms can be taken in by plants and used to build new molecules. So those atoms from the air could be carbon dioxide, from the ground could be magnesium ions, could be nitrates, it could be hydrogens and things like that, okay? But the plant can take those and build glucose, amino acids, lipids, all of those various food molecules. So those atoms that were in the air, they were in the ground, they're now in the plant. If something comes along, a consumer, primary consumer, if it's eating the plant, and it eats those, then those atoms are now built into their own bodies, like Dan Lydiate in the last example. They're eaten by animals and built into their own bodies. So those atoms are now inside the animals. When the animals and plants die, they decay, which means they get broken down, and those atoms return back to the ground and the air. And we've got that complete cycle now. So you've recycled everything. It's gone round and round there. Now, there's just a couple of extra arrows we need to add on here, and this is from the plants and the animals, which is excretion, okay? Because the plants will be excreting some of their atoms back out. For example, if the plant is doing photosynthesis, it gives off oxygen, so it's excreting that oxygen back out into the atmosphere. If animals are doing respiration, they're going to be breathing out, so excreting the carbon dioxide back out into the atmosphere. When animals do poos, all the atoms that's in that will go onto the ground, will decay back into the ground. Those atoms get returned. Same when they urinate. When a plant drops its leaves, those will fall to the ground and decay as well. So this really is a very complete cycle here. Let's put a couple of summary points though, is that the exact same atoms just keep going around and around. And you will contain atoms that were once in mammoths, triceratops, ancient Greeks, rocks, fire, literally anything you can think of would have been made of atoms. Those atoms went back into the ecosystem and could well have ended up in you. But the vital part of this is decay. Okay, the recycling is happening because of that point on the bottom there, the decay part. All of the atoms in the living things need to be returned to the ground in the air by decay. So that's what we're going to look at next. I suggest you take a quick screenshot of this before we move on. Okay, so this isn't going to take long now because decay isn't a novel new process. It's something you already know about. But if I've got a picture of those apples next to me, you can see the fresh apple over on the far side there. You can see it's starting to get more and more rotten until the one closest to me there is all shriveled, brown. Clearly, most of its atoms have disappeared from what was the apple. They've now gone back into the environment. They've been recycled. So that's just to show you stages of decay and to make sure you understand that decay is just rotting. But decay is actually a really simple thing because it's just another form of feeding and digestion. The dead material from a dead plant, a dead animal, rotting fruit, whatever, is just being eaten and digested by things. Now, the reason really why they came up with this term decay is because when they were first looking at it, you can't obviously see things feeding and eating. If you look at the pictures there of those apples, if you were just sat there watching it rot, it just kind of breaks down, changes color and disintegrates and starts to disappear. Before we had microscopes, people didn't really know what was going on there. We now know that there are distinct decomposers. These are organisms that are feeding on the material, but that they're generally so small you can't really see them. Now, probably the most active decomposer are bacteria. I've thrown the picture back up there of the bacteria that we used way back in the cells 1 video right at the start of phase 1, just to remind you of a bacterial cell. They don't all have all of those complex things. They don't all have a flagella, for example, but bacteria, which are everywhere, get onto the dead material and they just start feeding on it. They just start absorbing its nutrients and excreting their wastes. That's recycling. Just like when you eat foods, you digest them, break them down, rebuild them. It's exactly what the bacteria are doing. The second main type of decomposer is fungi. Now, I've put 2 examples here, one above and one to the side of me. This is a really good one though. This is fungi feeding off a dead tree. Anytime you go walking in the woods or any sort of parkland or woodland, you'll see dead trees, dead material. They'll almost always have loads of fungi of different types. Fungi have sort of tiny thread-like, they're kind of like roots, they're called hyphae, that push their way through dead material and secrete digestive enzymes to literally dissolve and break down dead material. And fungi do vast amounts of decomposition. If you didn't have the fungi there, most woodlands would just be piled up deep with dead trees, dead leaves that just haven't broken down. So you need the fungi and the bacteria to break that down enough to return the nutrients back into the soil. The third decomposer you may not have heard of. It's called a detritivore. You recognize the picture above me, but maybe not the name. Detritivores are big enough to be seen with the naked eye. They're not just worms like I've put in the picture above, but worms are a really good detritivore. Detritivores are the small organisms like worms, maggots, some types of beetle, tiny little organisms that munch away on the dead material, digest it, excrete the wastes, and do actually a huge amount of the processing. They also break some of the bigger lumps down into smaller bits to increase their surface area to make it easier for things like bacteria to break them down. But those are your 3 main types, and you need to know those: bacteria, fungi, and detritivores, detritivores being the bigger form of decomposer. Okay, just very quickly, the bread that's next to me here, you'll notice that came up at the same time as the fungi that's on the tree there. It's because bread, you might say that's gone moldy. Well, mold is another form of fungus. So molds and fungus are kind of the same thing. Let's just quickly throw up there the purpose of this though, and this really is the key thing about decay, is that decomposers return vital minerals and nutrients back into the ecosystem. That makes them available again to plants to take them up, remake them into useful molecules to be passed up the food chains to higher trophic levels. Last thing, let's look at the rate of decay and what affects it. So how can you speed up or slow down the rate of decay? And quite often with our food, we want to slow down the rate of decay. And there's three main things that affect the rate of decay. Same things really that you or I need. We need oxygen because we need to do respiration. So the bacteria, fungi, decomposers, they're doing respiration while they're feeding and decomposing your food. So they need oxygen. More oxygen they have, faster they can do decomposition. Decomposition doesn't work very well anaerobically. It does still work, but it works much faster with oxygen. They need moisture, same as you do. You need to take a drink or you'll die of dehydration. Same with all three of these decomposers. So if it's moisture around, they'll be able to work better. And lastly, temperature. Think back to stuff we've done on enzymes. Think back to what you've done in chemistry on collision theory. Temperature, keeping things warm, keeping molecules moving, increases the rate at which they collide and react. So if it's warm, you're going to get a faster rate of reaction. You're going to get more decomposition happening. Of course, if it gets too hot, you'll remember that proteins in particular denature, lose their shape and don't function anymore. So if it got really, really hot, decay wouldn't happen either. That does happen in some places where it's really hot and really dry, and you get mummification. If you've heard of mummies, like the ancient Egyptian mummies, that's what happens if you lack moisture, if it's somewhere really dry, and if it's somewhere really hot, that any microbes, their proteins have denatured anyway, then something will just dehydrate and mummify and can almost be preserved for thousands of years. But generally, oxygen, moisture, temperature is going to speed up decomposition. We use refrigerators in our homes because refrigerators, you close them, they shut off the amount of oxygen. Plus we wrap our food, we put it in containers or we wrap it in cling film or stuff. That's to stop oxygen getting to it. Refrigerators also suck the moisture out. They're dehumidifiers. They can dry things out. So it stays very dry inside fridges. So there's no moisture. And of course, fridges keep the temperature really, really low. So those three factors are what affect the rate of decay. Those do come up in exams quite often, and they'll normally give you an experiment to analyse where you'll look at the rate of decay on different things, and they'll ask you to comment on which factor may have been manipulated. Okay, that's really it for matter recycling. So let's just look at a quick summary, or we'll talk through a quick summary on the final slide. So put very, very simply, matter recycling is just taking the atoms that are on Earth, that have always been on Earth, and reusing them over and over and over again. And the way that you can do that is by having them built up in one organism, passed to another one. When those die, decay to release those atoms back into the environment to just keep sending them round and round and around. That's all matter recycling is. Where I want you to go now is to look at one very, very specific example of matter recycling, focusing on only one element, and that's carbon, because carbon is such an essential element for life. Carbon cycle links up lots of different bits of biology, so it's a really good one to focus some revision on. So head to that one now. There should be a link appearing over on the other side. As always, please do subscribe to my channel to keep yourself informed if you'd like to. Like this video if you found it useful, and remember I do now have a Facebook page, so you can go on there and there's other useful bits of biology that can support your learning as well. Thank you.